and welcome you all, students. This is the 12th week of our class, and that is the International Criminal Law. And today's lecture topic is the same as it is the continuation of the previous lecture, in which we are discussing and learning the substantive part of the International Criminal Law. And we have already discussed uh, that crime against humanity and war crimes. And today we are going to discuss one of the very much important topic that is the genocide. I am going to start the genocide by introduce this topic because this is the new phenomenon, modern terminology of international law. That is the mass atrocities have occurred throughout the time, but the use of term genocide, legally speaking, is a fairly recent development. While the term has gained prevalence in the global media and politics, it is critical to note that the concept remains relatively uh, nascent, having entered the international scene only in 1940 for post or pre-World War to when the Nazis started mass murder and mass atrocities against the Jew population. In this lecture, we are going to analyze the origins of the genocide as a global historical phenomenon, which providing a sense of fragmentary of the genocide's frequency throughout the history. It then turns to examine the origin and evolution of the concept itself, explore the some contested cases that test the boundaries of the genocide framework. So this our discussion at the points may seems complicated and confusing. So I advise you students, please fasten your seatbelts because here I'm going to start my today's lecture regarding the genocide. Genocide is not a wild beast or a natural disaster. It is a mass murder deliberately planned and carried out by individuals, all of whom are responsible whether they made the plan, gave the order, or carried out the killings. Whatever its scale, genocide is made up of the individual's acts and individual choices to perform them. So humans, individuals need to make the commitment as early in the life as possible that they will have no truck with it. To do that, but the way genocide become possible has to understood. So why genocide occurred? That there are the certain factors which are concerned, which are related with the genocide. So to understand the genocide, so these factors and these prevailing things which are concerned connected with the genocide has to be understood. So there's a considerable debate over its definition and the implication of the declaring an atrocity as a genocide. A word that is the supposed to connote a practice so hurried and so irreparable that the very utterance of the word would galvanize all who heard it. Instead, time has shown that the creating a genocide label does not mean that governments and courts readily apply it. On the contrary, inconsistent interpretations of the definition of the genocide and its controversial nature have directly effect on the international community's ability to prosecute and punish the crime of the genocide, an act that belongs at the apex of the pyramid of criminality. Further, students to understand genocide. So we have to study the prehistory, antiquity, and early modernity of the genocide. The word is new, the concept is ancient. It means the genocide word is new, but the concept ancient. It doesn't mean before 1944 there was no any mass murder and atrocities occurred. When we uh, study the pages of the history and look into the back time, there are a lot of things when our society is flourished, when population increase and we live in groups and we belong certain ideologies, the atrocities, those ideologies has been used to create those atrocities, and the mass murder, torture, and we saw those activities which cost us the very cost, not only cost and our conscious, but would shock our conscious when we study those incidents which happened in the past. The roots of the genocide are lost in distant millennia and will remain so unless an archaeology of the genocide can be developed. The difficulty, as Frank Chalkman and Kurt Johnson pointed out in their early study, is that such historical record and exists are ambiguous and undependable. And historically and anthropologically, peoples have always had a name for themselves. In a great many cases, the name means the pupil, who set the honors of that name up against all other people who were considered of lesser quality in some way. If the differences between the people and some other society were particularly large in terms of religion, language, manners, customs, and so on, then such others were seen as less than fully human, pagans, savages, or even animals. And the fewer the shared values and standards, the more likely members of the outgroup were and are and find themselves beyond the universe of the obligation. In sociologists, one of the Helimfian's evocative phrase is the advent of the religious traditions of the contempt and collective defamation, stereotypes, and derogatory metaphor indicating the victims is inferior. Subhumans like animals, insects, germs, viruses are superhuman like stannic and omnipotent. If certain classes of the people are predefined as alien, subhumans are the dehumanized or the enemy, it follows that they must be eliminated in order that we may live. So that is the concept. In order to we may live, we what we will do, the certain classes eliminate the other classes and cause that mass murder of the other racial or other ethnic groups of the population we have been seeing and we are witness. For example, a vivid example of this mindset is the text that underpins the cultural tradition common to most readers of the history, which the frequently depicts and frequently those people they are despotic and capricious sadist and his followers as genociders, genocidal killers. The trend starts early on in the very famous book Genesis, chapter number 6, and page number 17 or 19, where to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life from under heaven, with the exception of the nucleuses of the human and the animal life. Elsewhere, the principal rationale for genocide is the danger that people will be infected by the racial, ethnic, or religious practices of the people who surrounded them. They are to be those people. They are superior. They are holy cause in that those societies. So it is very difficult and obvious reasons in that many genocides in prehistory and antiquity were designed not just to eradicate enemy ethnicities but to incorporate and exploit some of their members. Usually it was children, particularly girls and women, who were spared murder. They were simultaneously seen as the unable to offer physical resistance and as a source of future offsprings for the dominant groups. We see here the roots of the genocide again, adults, males, and adolescent boys, and we will discuss further the roots of the genocides and the history. A combination of the gender selective, genderitical masculine, and root and branch genocide pervades accounts of the wars of the antiquity. On that principle, one of the scholar Chalk and Johnson provide a wide-ranging selection of the historical events such as the Assyrian Empire root and branch depredations in the first half of the first millennium and the destruction of the Meloni by Athens during the war in 5th century. Generical rampage described by the in this described by the Million Dialogue. Before studying the historical development which occurred in 1944, these are the certain incidents happened pre 1944. Those are the in 90, first of the spring, the first very atrocities occurred during the French Revolutions, which we call the Vendée of the Spring. In 1789, French revolutionaries, inspired by the example of their American counterparts, overthrew the despotic regime of the King Louis uh, 26 and established a new order based on the rights of the men. Their actions provoked immediate and attractable opposition at home and abroad. European armies marched on the French borders, posing a mortal threat to the revolutionary government in Paris. And in March 1793, followed by the execution of the King Louis and the imposition of the mass conscriptions where revolt spread in the Vendée. The population of this isolated and conservative region of the Western French declared itself unalterably opposed to the replacement of their Paris by pro-revolutionary designatees and the evisceration of the male population by levy, well trained and led by the royalist officers. Vendians rose up against the central authority. That authority was itself undergoing a rapid radicalization. The notorious terror of the Jacobin faction was instituted the same month as the rebellion in the result was a ferocious civil war that, according to the French author Arnold Secher, among others, constitute a genocide against the Vendian people. And before going next, mass murder of the history, during that civil war, possibly 1,50,000 people died in that carnage. Though not all were civilians, the generalized character of the killings was conveyed by the post-genocide census figures, which evidence not the usual war-related disparity of the male versus the female victims, but rough and rare apparently only after this ferocious and expression of the ideologically charged avenging terror, and which the collapse of the Committee of the Public Safety in Paris did the genocidal impetus when, though scared clashes with the rebels continued through 1796. Thereafter, next genocide, Zolo genocide between 1810 and 1828. The Zolo kingdom, under its dictatorial leader Shaka Zolo, waged one of the most ambitious campaigns of the expansion and annihilation the region has ever known. Huge swaths of the present-day South Africa and Zimbabwe were laid waste by the Zolo armies. The European invasion of these regions, which began shortly after, was greatly assisted by the upfield and the depopulation caused by the Zulu assault. The scale of the destruction was such, and the obliteration or dispersal of the victims so intensive that relatively little historical evidence was left to bear testimony to the terror. But it remains alive in the oral traditions of the people of the region whose ancestors were subjugated, slaughtered, or put to flight by the Zulus. This day, people in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda can trace their descent back to the refugees who fled from Shaka's warriors. Times of Shaka apparently implemented a gender selective experimentation study that is all but unique in the historical record. In conquering the lazy clan, Shaka convinced the then quite novel idea of the utterly demolishing them as the separate tribal entity by incorporating all their manhood into his own clan or following thereby bolstering his own military, but he usually destroyed women, infants, and old people who were deemed useless for his expansionist purpose. Until the Second World War, the phenomena of the genocide was a crime without a name. In the words of the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the man who named the crime placed it in a global historical context and demanded intervention, and remedial action was on obscure. Polish Jews a refuge from the Nazi-occupied Europe named Raphael Lemkin, 1959. His personal story is one of the most remarkable of the 20th century. Lemkin is an exceptional example of the non-entrepreneur. In 4 short years, he succeeded in coining a term genocide that concisely captured an age-old historical phenomena. He supported it with a wealth of historical documentation. He published a lengthy book that is the Axis Rule in Occupied Europe that applied the concept to campaigns of the genocide underway in the Lemkin native Poland and elsewhere in the Nazi-occupied territories, and then waged a successful campaign to pursue the new United Nations to draft a convention against the genocide. Another successful campaign to obtain the required number of the signatures, and another to secure the necessary national ratifications. Yet Lemkin died in obscurity in 1959. His funeral drew just 7 people. Only in recent years has the promise of his concept and United Nations Convention that incorporated it began to be realized. Students in 1944, Raphael Lemkin, a Polish lawyer, coined the term genocide to describe the deliberate plan of the Nazis and their satellites to exterminate entire groups, many the Jews and Gypsies, but also other ethnic groups, and to create a word that could not be associated with anything other than the highest of the crimes. Lemkin fashioned the term by combating the ancient Greek word genos, meaning race, nation, or tribe, with the Latin suffix cide, the genocide is the combination of the two Greek words. Which one part is the Greek, and the suffix part is from the French Latin language. Greek part, the geno, which means race, and side, which comes from the Latin word which means originating. So from the term kites, which means to kill, Lemkin defined genocide as per the Lemkin, the genocide is the a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of the essential foundation of the life of the national groups with the aim of inheriting the groups of themselves. The objective of such plan would be a disintegration of the political and social institution of the cultural, language, national feelings, religion, and economic existence of the national groups, and the destruction of the personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of the individuals belonging to such groups. Genocide is directed against the national group as an entity, and the actions involved are directed against the individuals not in their individual capacity but as the members of the national group. Genocide is not, however, a phenomena restricted to this century, but sadly a recurrent feature of the human history, which is the systematic annihilation of the entire groups of the people as a cut a broad swath of the blood through human history. The manifestation of the crime is as varied as the motives for it and the events that have triggered it. Genocide particularly marked the face of the 20th century at the start of the World War One. Armenians living in Turkey were the victim of the extermination campaign in which the estimated number of the deaths ranged from the 5 lakhs to a million. The tragic climax of the history of the genocide was the Holocaust, the Nazis' extermination of the European Jews. More than 6 million Jews fell victim due to the extermination policy of the Hitler. They were used to kill them by putting them in a gas chamber, and they were forced to work as a bonded labor, and their behavior was very inhuman towards them. On the 9th December 1948, a reaction to Nazi genocide, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of the Genocide was adopted, but the continuation of the genocide did not end up with the World War II. It again arose in Nigeria, which shaken the whole world. Towards the end of 20th century in Rwanda, civil war broke out in 1944, which took form of the genocide. Again in July 1945, genocide was committed during the World War in Bosnia. Despite the adoption of the Genocide Convention 1948, 50 years has been passed before an international court, the Yugoslavia Tribunal would be created to prosecute genocide. Though instead with the temporal and territorial limitations shortly after the United Security Council created the Rwanda Tribunal to deal specifically with the genocide in Rwanda. With the creation of the International Criminal Court, there is now for the first time an international institution that can push genocide anywhere in the world. By the time the General Assembly completed its standard sitting with the 1948 adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of the Genocide, genocide had a detailed and quite technical definition as a crime against the law of nations. The detailed and technical definition, which is per the General Assembly and the UN Charter, Article 1, the contracting parties confirms that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under the international law which they undertake to prevent and to punish. And the Article 2 of the same convention, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in a whole and a part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life, calculated to bring about physical destruction in a whole or in a part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, and Article 3, the following acts shall be punishable: the genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in a genocide. Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted by the ISTY Statute into Article 4, uh, paragraph 2, and Article 2, paragraph 2 of the ISTR statute. At the negotiation on the Statute of the International Criminal Court, efforts were made to include political and social groups in the definition. However, the majority of delegates preferred not to tamper with the definition recognized under the customary international law. Therefore, Article 6 of the ICC Statute repeats Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. So, student, further genocide defined by the scholars, we call it scholarly definitions. Is I'm going to mention some of those scholarly definitions. Start from the Peter Drost in 1959. Genocide is the deliberate destruction of the physical life of the individual human beings by reason of their membership of any human collectivity as such. And thereafter, another scholar, Joaquin Dadrian, 1975, he said genocide is the successful attempt by a dominant group vested with the formal authority and or with the preponderant access to the overall resources of the power to reduce by coercion or lethal violence the number of the minority groups whose ultimate extermination is held desirable and useful and whose respective vulnerability is a major factor contributing to the decision of the genocide. And another scholar, Eric Lewis, 1976, genocide is a structural and systematic destruction of the innocent people by a state bureaucratic apparatus. Genocide represents a systematic effort over time to liquidate a national population, usually a minority, and functions as a fundamental political policy to assure conformity and participation of the citizenry. And last one, Jake Nelson Porter, 1982, genocide is the deliberate destruction in a whole or in a part by a government or its agents of a racial, sexual, religious, tribal, or political minority. It can involve not only mass murder but also starvation, forced deportation, and political, economic, and biological subjugation. Genocide involves three major components: ideology, technology, and bureaucracy organizations. Which means genocide is any act that puts the very existence of the group in jeopardy. Genocide is a sense of purposeful action by perpetrators to destroy a collectively through a mass or selective murders of the group members and suppressing the biological and social reproduction of the collectivity. This can be accomplished through the imposed proscription or restriction of the reproduction of the group members, increasing infant mortality, and breaking the linkage between the reproduction and socialization of the children in the family or group of the origin. The perpetrator may represent the state of the victim, another state, or another collectively. And genocide is a form of the one-sided mass killing in which a state or other authority intends to destroy a group as the group and membership in it are defined by the perpetrator. So, students, what we have understand the elements of the definition may be divided into harder and softer positions. Paralleling the international legal distinction between hard and soft law according to the Christopher Rodolph, those who favor hard law in international legal regime argue that it enhances deterrence and enforcement by signing credible commitments, constraining self-serving auto interpretation of the rules, and maximizing compliance pull through increased legitimacy. Those who favor soft law argue that it facilitates compromise, reduce contracting costs, and allows for the learning and the change in the process of the institutional developments. In genocide, harder positions are guided by the concerns that genocide will be rendered banal or meaningless by the careless use. Some argue that this diverts attention from the proclaimed uniqueness of the Jewish Holocaust. Softer positions reflect concerns that excessively rigid framing, for example, a focus on the total physical extermination of the group, rule out too many actions that logically and morally demand to be included. Their proponents may also wish to see a dynamic and evolving genocide framework rather than a static and inflexible one. So, students, after understanding the historical background and historical event, thereafter we have understand the definition and meaning of the genocide. Then next the topic is the what is the relation to crimes against humanity. The definition of the crimes against humanity bears a strong resemblance to the definition of the genocide. Both categories of the crimes are closely related to each other and have the same origin. Genocide was first invest and subcategory of the crimes against humanity. In this context, genocide can be considered as the most aggravated form of the crimes against humanity. Indeed, large-scale massacres of the ethnic and religious groups were the first to be criminalized as the subclass of the category of the crimes against humanity. However, after the adoption of the Genocide Convention of 1948, genocide became the separate category of the crime per se, with its own specific actus rea and mens rea. With regard to the physical element of genocide and crimes against humanity, the two crimes form overlapping circle. For example, killing the members of an ethnic group or religious group, or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the racial or religious group may fall under the both categories. However, crimes against humanity have a broader scope because they encompasses acts that do not fall within the definition of genocide. For example, imprisonment and torture as such do not come within the purview of the genocide unless they amount to acts inflicting on members of the group conditions of the life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the group. On the other hand, at least according to some commentators, there might be acts of genocide that do not fall within the crime against humanity, such as killing detained and military personnel belonging to a particular religious or racial group on the basis of their membership in that group. The most distinguishing factor between the two categories of the crimes is mental element, which means the intent. In the case of crime against humanity, the perpetrator must have the intent to commit the underlying offense plus knowledge of the widespread and systematic practice constituting the general context of the offense. For genocide, the perpetrator must have committed the act with the specific intent, Dollis specialities, to destroy in whole or in a part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. In addition to possessing the intention to commit the underlying offense, the intention to commit the underlying offense can be shared by both categories in the case of the same underlying offense. For example, in the case of the murder, the intent to kill is required by both categories. However, genocide additionally requires the intention to destroy a group. Genocide and prosecution is a crime against the humanity. Both have the intent of the seriously discriminating against the members of the particular group. However, genocide requires a particular intent to destroy a group in a whole in a part. The next difference between the two crimes is that The crime of genocide is not based on any requirement of the scale. On the other hand, crime against humanity is an act committed as a part of the wider spread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with the knowledge of the attack. The next is after understanding the distinguish points or what is the difference between the crimes against humanity and genocide. Genocide in the International Criminal Courts and Tribunals. The provisions of the ISTY and ISTR statutes dealing with the genocide are drawn verbatim from the Article 2 and 3 of the Genocide Convention. The Article number 4 of the ISTY statute and Article 2 of the ISTR statute regarding the genocide, and thereafter the ICC statute in the article which is also reproduced the Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. In its Article 6, however, the drafters of the ICC statute decided not to include the term of the Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, which sets out the five different forms of the punishment. Genocide as genocidal act, the forms of the participation which attacks individual criminal responsibility for the genocide are the same as those set out for the all other offences under the ICC statute and enumerated in the Article 25 of its statute. It should, however, be noted that Article 25 of the ICC statute omits conspiracy to commit the genocide as an offence. So Article 6 of the ICC, which is regarding the genocide and also individuals' criminal responsibility, which is defined in Article 25 of the ICC statute. And further, the ICC statute also refer Article 33 to genocide in its, which relates to the superior orders. Article 33, paragraph number 2 states that orders to commit genocide are manifestly unlawful. Accordingly, superior's orders can never be a defense to this crime. And the ECCC also included the Genocide Convention definition of the genocide in its applicable law, and the law of the establishment of the extraordinary chambers. Article 4 is regarding the genocide in that convention, and yet for the punishable acts of the ECCC did not include the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in the Article 3 Clause C and complicity in genocide in Article 3 Clause E of the Genocide Convention in its applicable law, and changed the wording of the Article 3 Clause A of the Genocide Convention to say participation in the acts of genocide instead of referring simply to genocide. So thereafter, students, we discuss the different type of convention and international tribunal courts with the Article 2 and 3 of the Genocide Convention. And thereafter, how international and domestic law deal with the genocide. Lemkin claimed that the occurrence of the genocide would lead to international disturbance and therefore urged for its repression to be based not only on the international and constitutional law but also on the criminal law of the various countries. Article 5 of the Genocide Convention requires that contracting parties undertake to enact, in accordance with the respective constitution, the necessary legislation to give effect to the provision of the present convention, and in particular to provide effective penalties for the person found guilty of the genocide or any other acts enumerated in the Article 3. There have been several domestic trials for genocide. The most famous case after the Second World War was the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Israel in 1961 for the crimes against the Jewish people. Under Israeli law, this offense incorporated all the elements of the definition of the genocide in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. After the establishment of the ISTY and ISTR, some national courts began to institute criminal proceedings against persons accused of serious crimes in the former Yugoslavia. For example, German courts have pronounced on some cases of the genocide. In other domestic trial, for genocide is a case of the special prosecution versus the Colonel Mengistu, all brought before the Ethiopian Federal High Court. Domestic genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes trial are further also we will discuss in further lectures if we will have a time. So students, um, it was the first session of our lesson, our lecture regarding the genocide. Mostly this lecture based on, in order to understand what is the crime of genocide, how it evolved, and the laws, how the law of genocide has been developed throughout the history, and the phenomena and the principle and the definition we have discussed in this lesson. So after a short break, I will continue my lecture, and we will discuss the further topics which are related to the genocide, and the major topic in this lesson will be the elements of the genocides. Thank you.